The engine roared to life as my son, David, snatched the keys right out of my hand. "You are too old to drive, Mom," he said, his voice cold and distant. "Tomorrow, I am dropping you off at an assisted living facility on my way to my vacation." I stood on my driveway, paralyzed, watching my own son steal my brand new $32,000 sedan. I did not scream. I did not beg. Instead, I calmly pulled out my phone and sent a text with only 5 words. "Check the glove box now." Miles away on the highway, David slammed on the brakes. The screech of tires echoed as he realized he had walked right into a legal trap. Inside that glove compartment was a single envelope that changed everything. It turned his stolen joyride into the biggest mistake of his life. Before I reveal the shocking contents of that envelope, I would love to hear from you. Which beautiful city are you watching from today? Please note, while this story is dramatized for your listening experience, the message of dignity and standing up for yourself is very real. The silence in this house is no longer just quiet. It has become heavy. It is a thick, suffocating weight that presses against my chest the moment I wake up. For 40 years, this house was a symphony of life. There was the rhythmic thumping of Frank's boots on the porch. There was the constant, comforting hum of the radio tuned to the morning news. And, most importantly, there was the sound of his laughter. Frank had a laugh that could fill every corner of a room. It was deep. It was honest. It was home. But now, he is gone. 3 months have passed since the funeral, and I still find myself waking up at 6 in the morning to make 2 cups of coffee. I stand there in the kitchen, watching the steam rise, before I remember. I only need 1 cup now. Just 1. I look at his favorite blue mug sitting in the cabinet. It looks lonely. Everything in this house looks lonely now. I spend most of my days wandering from room to room, like a ghost haunting my own life. I see the dent in his favorite recliner where he sat every evening to read the paper. I can still smell the faint scent of his aftershave in the hallway. It is a mix of cedarwood and Old Bay. Sometimes, I stand there and breathe it in until my eyes sting with tears. People tell you that time heals all wounds. But those people have never lost a partner of 40 years. They do not understand that when Frank died, a part of Eleanor Miller died with him. The depression is a grey fog. It makes the simplest tasks feel like climbing a mountain. Washing a single plate feels exhausting. Answering the phone feels impossible. I found myself sitting in the dark last night, staring at the television without even turning it on. I was waiting for him to walk through the door and tell me about his day, waiting for the nightmare to end. I started thinking that maybe David was right. Maybe I was getting too old to manage this big house on my own. Maybe I was just a flickering candle, waiting for the wind to blow me out. I was ready to give up. I truly was. But then I found the letter. It was tucked inside the pages of his old Bible. It was a note Frank had written to me years ago, back when he first got sick. His handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. He wrote, "Eleanor, my brave girl, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to hold your hand. But you must promise me one thing. Do not let the silence win. As long as there is air in your lungs, you have a purpose. Go out. See the world. Live enough for the both of us." I read those words over and over. I cried until I could not cry anymore. And then I felt a spark. It was small. It was tiny. But it was there. I realized that by sitting here in the dark, I was not honoring Frank. I was wasting the life he had worked so hard to provide for us. I took a deep breath. I wiped my face. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I saw a woman with grey hair and tired eyes. But I also saw the woman Frank loved. And that woman was not a quitter. The decision happened on a Tuesday. I walked out to the garage to start our old Ford. It was a vehicle Frank had kept running for nearly 20 years, with nothing but a wrench and pure stubbornness. I turned the key. The engine groaned. It coughed. And then, with a final metallic shudder, it died. I sat there in the silence of the garage and laughed. I laughed until I realized I was actually free. That car belonged to our past. It was a relic of a life that was over. I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at our bank statements. Between the life insurance policy and the 41K savings we had spent decades building, I had enough. I did not need permission. I did not need a co-signer. I called a car service and went straight to the dealership. I met a young man named Ryan. He was patient. He did not treat me like a confused grandmother. He showed me a beautiful silver sedan. It was sleek. It was safe. It smelled like fresh leather and new beginnings. When he told me the price was $32,000, I did not flinch. I wrote the check right then and there, $32,000 for my independence. It was the best bargain I had ever made. When I pulled out of the dealership, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Not from fear, but from excitement. For the first time in months, I felt in control. I drove down the main street with the windows cracked. I felt the breeze on my face. I felt the power of the engine beneath my feet. I was Eleanor Miller, and I was going somewhere. I decided to call my son David. I wanted him to hear the strength in my voice. I wanted him to be proud of me. When he finally answered, I said, "David, honey, you will not believe it. I just bought a brand new car. A silver sedan. It is beautiful." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I expected a cheer. I expected him to ask me to come over so he could see it. Instead, his voice was flat. He sounded annoyed. He said, "A new car? Mom, are you serious? Why would you spend $32,000 on a car at your age? You barely leave the house." The joy in my chest deflated a little. I told him that was the point. I told him I wanted to start leaving the house. I told him I wanted to visit my friends and go to the park. David sighed. It was that heavy, patronizing sigh he always used when he thought I was being difficult. He said, "We will talk about this later, Mom. Tiffany and I were actually going to call you about your living situation anyway. Just stay put. Do not do anything else reckless." I hung up the phone and looked at the shiny dashboard. A small knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach. I had expected my son to be my biggest supporter, but his reaction felt more like a warning. He did not see a woman reclaiming her life. He saw an old woman spending his inheritance. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I looked at the silver hood of my car reflecting the afternoon sun. I realized then that my battle for freedom was only just beginning. I was proud of my new car. I was proud of my $32,000 investment in myself. But for the first time I felt a chill of suspicion about my own son. I knew I had to be smart. I knew I had to protect myself. The morning sun was shining brightly over my garden when I heard the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. For a brief, flickering moment, my heart leaped with a mother's hope. I thought David had come to his senses. I thought he was coming to see my new car, to hug me, and to tell me he was happy for me. I smoothed my dress and opened the door with a smile. But that smile died the moment I saw Tiffany stepping out of the passenger side. Tiffany did not look like a woman coming to visit her mother-in-law. She looked like an auditor. She wore an expensive coral-colored blouse and carried a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Beside her, David looked uncomfortable. He would not meet my eyes. He kept his head down, staring at the gravel, as they walked toward the porch. I invited them in. I offered them coffee. I tried to be the person Frank always wanted me to be. Gracious, kind, welcoming. But Tiffany did not even wait to sit down before she began her inspection. She walked through my living room, her eyes darting from the grandfather clock to the silver tea set on the sideboard. I could almost see the price tags flashing in her mind. She touched the fabric of my curtains and sighed, as if my very existence was a chore she had to manage. "Eleanor," she began, her voice dripping with a fake, sugary sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We saw the car out front. It is quite a bold choice. A silver sedan. Very flashy for a widow living on a fixed income, don't you think?" I felt the first sting of anger. I told her that the car was not flashy, it was reliable. I told her it was my way of reclaiming my independence. But Tiffany just laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like glass breaking. She turned to David and nodded. It was a signal. David cleared his throat. He finally looked at me, but there was no love in his expression, only a cold, clinical detachment. He told me that they had been talking. He said that Tiffany's parents were planning a big family trip to the mountains for a whole week. He said their own vehicle was having transmission issues and would not make the climb. And then he said the words that broke my heart. He told me that since I did not really go anywhere, and since I was clearly struggling to make good decisions, he was going to take my new $32,000 car for their trip. He said it so casually, as if he were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. "I am not struggling, David," I said. My voice was trembling, but I tried to keep it steady. "I bought that car for myself. It is my property." That was when the mask slipped. David stepped closer, his face turning hard. He told me that I was being selfish. He told me that I was 65 years old and that my reflexes were not what they used to be. He said that he was doing me a favor by taking the keys. And then he dropped the ultimate betrayal. He told me that when they got back from their vacation, they had already made an appointment for me. An appointment at the Oak Creek Assisted Living Facility. He called it a transition. He said I was becoming Lulern, confused, and that I was no longer capable of living in this house alone. He said that by taking the car now, he was just starting the process of simplifying my life. I felt a wave of nausea. My own son was standing in my kitchen, telling me that I was useless. He was telling me that my 40 years of motherhood and my $32,000 investment meant nothing. He reached out and grabbed the keys from the counter before I could move. "We will be back in a week, Mom," he said. His voice was like ice. "Try to pack some things while we are gone. It will make the move to the facility much easier for everyone." They walked out. Tiffany did not even look back. She just climbed into my brand new car, adjusted the mirror, and smiled. I stood at the window, watching my silver sedan disappear down the street. I felt humiliated. I felt small. I felt like a piece of old furniture being moved to the attic. But as the roar of the engine faded, the sadness began to turn into something else. It turned into a cold, hard flame of resolve. They thought I was a victim. They thought I was a weak, grieving woman who would simply fold under their pressure. But what David and Tiffany did not know was that I had seen this coming. I am a mother. I know my son. And more importantly, I know the woman he married. 3 weeks ago, I had noticed Tiffany in the hallway, whispering to David about the equity in my home. I had seen her looking at my bank books with a predatory gleam in her eyes. I knew that my husband Frank would never have allowed this. He always told me, "Eleanor, hope for the best, but prepare for the storm." And the storm had arrived. The day after I bought the car, I did not go home to celebrate. Instead, I drove straight to the downtown office of Mr. Henderson. He had been our family lawyer for 30 years. He was a man of integrity, a man who understood that a woman's dignity is not up for negotiation. I sat in his wood-paneled office, the smell of old books and expensive tobacco surrounding me. I told him everything. I told him about my fears. I told him about the way Tiffany looked at my house. I told him about the subtle comments David made about my memory. Mr. Henderson listened in silence. He did not judge me. He did not tell me I was being paranoid. Instead, he reached for a legal pad and began to write. "We are going to build you a suit of armor, Eleanor," he said. His voice was calm and reassuring. Together we spent 4 hours crafting a defense. We started with the car. Mr. Henderson drafted a formal notice. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that I, Eleanor Miller, was the sole owner of the $32,000 silver sedan. It clarified that any unauthorized use by any person, including family members, would be reported as grand theft auto. He stamped it with his official seal. It was not just a piece of paper. It was a weapon. Then we moved to the will. This was the hardest part. It felt like I was cutting a limb off my own body, but I knew it had to be done. I instructed Mr. Henderson to remove David as the primary beneficiary. I did not do it out of spite. I did it out of protection. I directed that my estate be divided among 3 local charities that help elderly women in need. If David wanted my money, he would have to earn it by being a son, not by waiting for me to die. Finally, Mr. Henderson brought in a colleague, a medical professional. We spent an hour conducting a formal mental competency evaluation. I answered every question. I performed every task. When we were done, I had a certified document proving that I was in perfect mental health. I was not Lulern. I was not confused. I was a 65-year-old woman in full command of her life. Mr. Henderson placed all these documents into a thick, brown manila envelope. He looked me in the eye and said, "Eleanor, I hope you never have to use this, but if the day comes when they try to take your freedom, you show them this. You show them that you are still the captain of your ship." I took that envelope and I hid it in the glove box of my new car. I tucked it deep behind the owner's manual. I prayed to God that David would respect me enough that I would never have to reveal it. I wanted to believe my son was better than this. I wanted to believe that the boy I raised with so much love was still in there somewhere. But as I sat in my empty house, remembering the cold look in David's eyes as he stole my keys, I knew the time had come. He had chosen his side. He had chosen Tiffany's greed over his mother's heart. I picked up my phone. My hands were no longer shaking. I felt a strange sense of peace. I typed the message. 5 simple words. "Check the glove box now." I pressed send. And then, I sat back in Frank's old chair and waited for the world to tremble. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the silence of my living room. 2 hours had passed since I sent that text message. 2 hours of waiting. I did not spend that time crying. I spent it sitting by the window, watching the street, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I felt a strange, cold clarity that I had never known before. When I finally saw my silver sedan pull back into the driveway, it did not look like a trophy of victory. It looked like a piece of my life that I had fought to reclaim. David stepped out of the car. He looked older. His shoulders were slumped, and his face was a ghostly shade of pale. In his hand, he clutched the thick, brown manila envelope. He walked toward the house with the heavy footsteps of a man heading toward his own execution. He did not use his key this time. He rang the doorbell. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. He knew he no longer had the right to enter my world without permission. I opened the door and stood my ground. I did not invite him in with a smile. I did not ask if he was hungry. I simply stepped back and pointed toward the living room. "Sit down, David," I said. My voice was quiet. It was steady. It was the voice of the woman who had spent 40 years being his mother, but was now his judge. He sat on the edge of the earth. He sat on the edge first, the very same sofa where I had collapsed in tears just hours before. He laid the envelope on the coffee table as if it were a bomb about to go off. "I read it, Mom," he whispered. His voice broke on the last word. "I read everything. The lawyer's letter, the will, the medical evaluation. I didn't know you had done all this. You didn't know because you didn't think I was capable," I replied. I sat in the armchair across from him. "You thought your mother was a fragile, grieving old woman who could be pushed into a corner. You thought I was a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be respected." David started to cry. He put his head in his hands and sobbed. He started babbling about Tiffany. He said it was her idea. He said she was the one who told him I was getting confused. He said she was the one who insisted they needed the car for the trip to the mountains. He sounded like a child caught in a lie, trying to blame a friend for his own bad behavior. "Stop it, David," I said. The sharpness in my voice made him jump. "I do not want to hear about Tiffany. You are a 42-year-old man. You made the choice to take my keys. You made the choice to tell me I belong in a home. You looked me in the eye and stole my dignity. Tiffany did not do that. You did." I leaned forward. My eyes locked onto his. I reminded him of the years I had worked 2 jobs to pay for his music lessons. I reminded him of the jewelry I sold to keep him in a good school. I reminded him that I had been his shield and his foundation for 4 decades. And this is the return on my investment. I asked. A son who treats me like a burden. A son who views my $32,000 car as a free rental for his in-laws. The room felt heavy with the weight of his shame. I gave him my ultimatum. It was not a request. It was a demand. Here is what is going to happen, I told him. You are going to return to your home. You are going to find a therapist. And you are going to attend individual sessions for at least 6 months. You need to understand why you allowed your wife to turn you into a man I do not recognize. Until I see proof of real change, you are not welcome in this house. If you ever, and I mean ever, try to manipulate me or take my property again, I will file that police report for Grand Theft Auto, and I will make sure Mr. Henderson executes the new will immediately. David looked at me with a mix of fear and realization. He saw that the mother who used to forgive everything was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth. He nodded slowly, took his own car keys from his pocket and left. He walked out to the street to call a taxi. I watched my silver sedan sit safely in the driveway. Justice was not just served, it was restored. If I thought the confrontation with David was the end of the storm, I was mistaken. The real venom was yet to come. The following afternoon, a familiar car screeched into my driveway. It was Tiffany. She did not ring the bell. She pounded on the door like a woman possessed. I opened the door, and before I could speak, she began to scream. Gone was the sugary, fake sweetness. Gone was the coral-colored blouse and the designer bag. She looked frantic. Her face was twisted with a rage that was terrifying to behold. "You crazy, selfish old woman," she shrieked. "Do you have any idea what you've done? David is a wreck. He's talking about therapy and boundaries. He's talking about how we can't afford the trip because you won't let us use the car. You are ruining our lives over a piece of metal." I stood behind my screen door, feeling remarkably calm. I looked at her and saw her for exactly what she was. A predator who had lost her prey. "The car is mine, Tiffany," I said. "And David's life is his own. If his life is ruined because he has to take responsibility for his actions, then perhaps it was never a very good life to begin with." Tiffany stepped closer, her finger pointing at my face. She told me that I was a bitter widow. She said that Frank would be ashamed of me for tearing the family apart. She told me that the money in my bank account belonged to David anyway, and that I was just holding it hostage. "Family?" I asked. I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my throat. Family does not steal. Family does not plot to put a healthy woman in a nursing home so they can sell her house. You were never interested in being my family, Tiffany. You were only interested in being my heir. The argument escalated. She began to threaten me. She said she would make sure I never saw my future grandchildren. She said she would tell everyone in town that I had lost my mind. I realized in that moment that I had spent 5 years trying to be nice to this woman. I had spent 5 years biting my tongue and ignoring her insults for the sake of peace. And all it had done was empower her to believe she could destroy me. "Get off my property," I said. My voice was not a scream. It was a command. "I am not going anywhere until you agree to change that will back," she yelled. I pulled out my cell phone and began to dial 911. I looked her right in the eyes as I did it. "You have 30 seconds to get into your car and leave," I said. "I have a certified legal document proving my mental competence. I have a lawyer on speed dial. And right now, I am calling the police to report a trespasser who is harassing a senior citizen. Would you like to stay and explain your side of the story to the sheriff?" Tiffany froze. She looked at the phone in my hand. She looked at the silver sedan in the driveway. She realized that the helpless widow was gone. She spat a final curse at me, spun on her heel, and ran to her car. She drove away so fast that she left black tire marks on the asphalt. I stood on my porch and took a deep, clean breath. The air felt different. It felt lighter. I realized that by defending myself, I had not torn the family apart. The family was already broken. I had simply stopped pretending that it wasn't. I had allowed David and Tiffany to treat me like a doormat because I was afraid of the conflict. But the conflict was already there. I walked back into my house and locked the door. I did not feel sad. I did not feel guilty. I felt an overwhelming sense of release. For the first time in years, the shadows in my house did not look like ghosts. They just looked like shadows. I was Eleanor Miller. I was 65 years old. I was the owner of a $32,000 car, a beautiful home, and most importantly, I was the owner of my own life. I sat down and made myself a cup of tea. It was the best cup of tea I had ever tasted. The 5-hour drive to the coast was not just a trip. It was a pilgrimage. I left my driveway at 3 a.m, while the rest of the world was still wrapped in sleep. The headlights of my silver sedan cut through the darkness, illuminating the long, winding roads of New England. For the first time in my life, I was the one behind the wheel on a long journey. Frank had always done the driving. I had always been the navigator, the one holding the map and handing him snacks. But now, I was the captain. Driving through the quiet towns and the dark forests of Maine felt like a dream. The engine of my $32,000 car hummed with a quiet strength. It felt like it was carrying me toward a new version of myself. I thought about the many times Frank and I had talked about this trip. We had planned to see the Atlantic Ocean together once he retired. We wanted to see the first light of the day touch the American shore. We ran out of time. But as I gripped the steering wheel, I did not feel like I was traveling alone. I felt his presence in the passenger seat. I felt his approval in the silence. I arrived at a small rocky beach near an old lighthouse just as the sky was beginning to turn a deep, bruised purple. The air was cold. It was sharp, with the scent of salt and pine. I stepped out of the car and walked down to the water's edge. My boots crunched on the pebbles. I found a large, flat rock and sat down. I waited. As the sky lightened to a soft pink and then a vibrant orange, I noticed 2 other women standing further down the shore. They looked to be around my age. They wore thick sweaters and held thermoses of coffee. We did not speak at first. We simply shared the moment. But eventually, one of them walked over. Her name was Martha. She told me she had lost her husband 2 years ago. She came here every month, she said, to remind herself that the world keeps turning. The ocean does not care about our sorrows, Martha said. Her voice was wise and weathered. It just keeps moving. And so must we. We sat together as the sun finally broke over the horizon. It was a ball of liquid fire rising out of the cold, dark Atlantic. The light hit the water, creating a path of gold that seemed to lead straight to me. In that moment, I felt something wash over me. It felt like a baptism. I felt the weight of the betrayal by David. I felt the poison of Tiffany's words. I felt the crushing grief of losing Frank. All of it seemed to dissolve into the vastness of the ocean. I realized then that I had been holding on to my anger as a way to stay connected to my pain. But the sun was rising regardless of my pain. I chose to let it go. I chose to forgive myself for not being perfect. I chose to forgive Frank for leaving me too soon. And I chose to forgive David, not for his sake, but for mine. I wanted to be light. I wanted to be free. As I drove back toward my car, I looked at the silver sedan, shining in the morning light. It was no longer just a car. It was a testament to my survival. I was Eleanor Miller. I was 65 years old, and I was standing in the light of a brand new day. Returning home did not feel like returning to a tomb. When I pulled into my driveway, I did not see the shadows of what I had lost. I saw the possibilities of what I could build. The first thing I did was open every window in the house. I let the fresh Maine air blow through the rooms, carrying away the stale scent of grief and the lingering tension of the past week. I sat at my kitchen table and checked my phone. There was a message from David. It was short. It was humble. He said, "Mom, I had my first therapy session today. It was the hardest hour of my life. I am starting to see how much I let things slide. I am so sorry. I will respect your space." I did not reply immediately. I breathed. I felt a sense of peace knowing that he was finally taking the first step toward becoming a man of character. Our relationship was not fixed. It would take months, perhaps years, to rebuild the trust that was shattered. But the foundation of that rebuilding would be respect. He now knew that I was a woman with boundaries. He knew that I was the owner of my life. I decided it was time to change the house. Frank had loved the dark wood and the heavy curtains, but I needed light. Over the next month, I hired a painter to turn the living room into a bright, airy sanctuary of cream and soft blue. I took down the old, heavy drapes. I bought new, vibrant rugs. I transformed Frank's old workshop into a small art studio. I had always wanted to paint, but I was always too busy being a wife and a mother. I was too busy making sure everyone else's dreams were being nurtured. Now, it was my turn. I joined a local art club at the community centre. I met other seniors who were reinventing themselves. I met a man named Sam who took woodworking classes. I met a woman named Gladys who was learning to play the cello at 70. We laughed about our mistakes. We celebrated our small victories. I realized that for 40 years, my identity had been tied to who I was for other people. I was Frank's wife. I was David's mother. I was a daughter, a neighbor, a caregiver. But in the quiet moments of my new studio, with a brush in my hand and the silver sedan parked outside, I discovered who I was for myself. I am Eleanor Miller. I'm a woman who enjoys strong coffee and the silence of a Maine morning. I am a woman who can navigate a 5-hour drive alone and find her way home. I am a woman who knows that her value is not measured by her inheritance, but by the strength of her soul. The house is no longer a mausoleum of memories. It is a home of the present. I still miss Frank every single day. I still talk to his photo before I go to bed. But I no longer talk to him about my sadness. I talk to him about my paintings. I talk to him about the new friends I have made. I think he would be proud of the woman I have become. Sometimes, justice is not about a courtroom or a jail cell. Sometimes, justice is simply living well. My son took my car, thinking I was weak. He ended up giving me the spark I needed to prove how strong I really am. I look out my window at my silver sedan. It is ready for the next adventure. And so am I. If my story has moved you, please remember that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity. Do not let anyone tell you that your time has passed. Your best chapter might just be the one you are about to write. Thank you for being part of my journey. This is Eleanor Miller. And I am finally home. I am sitting on my front porch now, watching the evening sun dip below the horizon. My silver sedan is parked right there in the driveway, its polished surface catching the final rays of light. To some, it is just a $32,000 car. But to me, it is a monument. It is a reminder that I am still here. I am still capable. And I am still the owner of my own destiny. Throughout our lives, we spend so much time taking care of others. We raise our children. We support our husbands. We build homes and communities. And somewhere along the way, society starts to treat us like we are expired. Like we are pieces of old furniture that can be pushed into a corner or moved to an assisted living facility without our consent. My son, David, made that mistake. He forgot that the woman who gave him life was the same woman who had the strength to protect her own. He saw my 65 years as a weakness. He did not realize that those years were actually my armor. I want to speak directly to you now. To those of you who have felt the sting of being underestimated, do not let the silence win. Your age is not a cage. It is a crown of experience and wisdom. You have every right to drive your car, to live in your home, and to spend your hard-earned savings on your own joy. Setting boundaries with the people we love is the hardest thing we will ever do. It hurts to realize that we have to protect ourselves from our own children. But true love cannot exist without respect. By standing up for myself, I did not just save my car. I saved my relationship with my son. I taught him that his mother is a human being with rights and dignity. If my story has touched your heart today, I would be so honored if you would share your thoughts. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with your family? Please, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one of them. Before you go, please click the like button and subscribe to Elderly Stories. We are building a community here where our voices are heard and our lives are celebrated. Please note, while the events of this story were written to inspire and entertain, the message of protecting your legal rights is very real. Always consult with a professional for your own legal and financial needs. Thank you for spending this time with me. This is Eleanor Miller. I am 65 years old. I am driving my own car. And I am finally, truly free. God bless you all. And I will see you in the next story.